Marcus Williams sat in the third row of his advanced chemistry class, his notebook open and his pencil ready. He loved science. Ever since he was a little boy, he had dreamed of becoming a doctor. His mother always told him that education was the key to everything, and Marcus believed her with all his heart. He studied hard every night, sometimes until midnight, making sure he understood every concept and every formula. Mrs. Patricia Henderson stood at the front of the classroom. She was a tall woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. She had been teaching at Lincoln High School for 15 years, and everyone knew she ran her classroom with an iron fist. Some students respected her. Others feared her. But Marcus just wanted to learn from her. The bell rang and Mrs. Henderson began her lecture about chemical reactions. Marcus took notes carefully, writing down every important point. He raised his hand several times to ask questions, but Mrs. Henderson ignored him. This had been happening for weeks now. At first, Marcus thought maybe she just didn't see his hand. But today, when she called on Jennifer, who sat right next to him and raised her hand at the same time, Marcus began to understand something was wrong. After class, Marcus stayed behind. He approached Mrs. Henderson's desk nervously. His heart was pounding, but he needed to understand why she kept ignoring him. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe she didn't realize he had questions too. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her papers with cold eyes. Marcus swallowed hard and asked if he could discuss the homework assignment. He had gotten a C on his last test, which was unusual for him. He always got A's and B's in his other classes. Mrs. Henderson sighed loudly as if Marcus was wasting her time. She told him that maybe chemistry was too difficult for him. Maybe he should consider taking a simpler class, something more suited to his abilities. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had studied for hours for that test. He knew the material. But when he tried to explain this, Mrs. Henderson cut him off. She said that some students were naturally gifted in sciences, and others were not. She suggested that perhaps Marcus would do better in physical education or art classes. Her words felt like knives. Marcus had never been spoken to like this by a teacher before. All his other teachers encouraged him and praised his hard work. Marcus left the classroom feeling smaller than he had ever felt. He walked through the hallways in a daze, barely noticing his friends calling out to him. When he got home that afternoon, he went straight to his room. His mother, Diana Williams, noticed immediately that something was wrong. She had always been able to read her son like a book. Diana knocked on his door gently and came in. She sat on the edge of his bed and asked what had happened. At first, Marcus said nothing was wrong. He didn't want to worry his mother. She worked 2 jobs to make sure he could focus on his studies. She cleaned offices at night and worked as a nursing assistant during the day. The last thing he wanted was to add to her stress. But Diana was persistent. She told Marcus that she could see the pain in his eyes, and whatever it was, they would face it together. Finally, Marcus broke down. He told her everything. He told her about being ignored in class, about the C on his test, about Mrs. Henderson's cruel words suggesting he wasn't smart enough for chemistry. Diana listened quietly, her jaw tightening with each word. When Marcus finished, she hugged him close. She told him that he was brilliant, that he was capable of anything he set his mind to, and that no teacher had the right to make him feel less than he was. Then she asked to see his test. Marcus pulled out the test from his backpack. Diana, who had studied nursing and understood science well, looked through each question carefully. What she saw made her blood boil. Marcus had gotten several answers correct, but Mrs. Henderson had marked them wrong. On one question about molecular bonds, Marcus had given the exact answer from the textbook, but it was marked incorrect with red ink slashed across it. Diana looked at more questions. The pattern became clear. Marcus knew this material. His answers were right, but somehow he was being graded unfairly. Diana felt a familiar anger rising in her chest. She had faced discrimination herself when she was younger, but she had hoped things would be different for her son. She had hoped that in school, with educated people, her Marcus would be judged only by his mind and his character. That night, Diana barely slept. She kept thinking about her son's sad face, about his defeated shoulders when he came home. She thought about all the nights he studied at the kitchen table while she prepared dinner. She thought about his dreams of becoming a doctor, of helping people, of making a difference in the world. And she knew she had to do something. The next morning, Diana called her supervisor at the hospital and asked for the morning off. She never took time off, and her supervisor was surprised, but Diana was firm. This was about her son's future. This was about justice. She dressed in her best outfit, a navy blue suit she saved for special occasions. She wanted to look professional and composed. Marcus begged her not to come to the school. He was embarrassed and afraid it would make things worse. But Diana kissed his forehead and told him that sometimes standing up for what's right was more important than avoiding confrontation. She told him that she wasn't going to let anyone dim his light. Diana drove Marcus to school that morning. As they pulled into the parking lot, Marcus felt his anxiety growing. His mother squeezed his hand and smiled. She told him to go to his classes and let her handle this. She would meet with the principal and Mrs. Henderson. She would get to the bottom of this situation. Marcus walked toward his first period class, looking back several times at his mother. Diana stood tall, her shoulders back, her head held high. She looked like a warrior preparing for battle. And in many ways she was. She was fighting for her son's dignity, for his future, for his right to be treated fairly. Diana walked into the main office and asked to speak with Principal Roberts. The secretary told her that the principal was busy, and she would need to make an appointment. Diana smiled politely but firmly stated that she would wait. She sat down in one of the hard plastic chairs and folded her hands in her lap. She wasn't leaving until someone listened to her. An hour passed. Diana waited patiently. Other parents came and went. The secretary kept glancing at her nervously. Finally, Principal Roberts came out of his office. He was a middle-aged man with glasses and a tired expression. He asked Diana if he could help her. Diana stood up and introduced herself. She explained that she was Marcus Williams' mother, and that she needed to discuss a serious matter regarding her son's treatment in Mrs. Henderson's chemistry class. Principal Roberts looked uncomfortable. He suggested they step into his office to talk privately. Inside the office, Diana remained calm but direct. She explained everything Marcus had told her. She showed Principal Roberts the test with the incorrectly marked answers. She spoke about how Mrs. Henderson had ignored Marcus in class and suggested he wasn't capable of handling advanced chemistry. Diana's voice never rose, but her words carried the weight of a mother's love and determination. Principal Roberts listened, his expression growing more concerned with each sentence. He asked Diana if she was certain about these claims. Diana looked him straight in the eye and said she had the evidence right in front of him. She also said that if this matter wasn't addressed properly, she would take it to the school board and beyond if necessary. The principal promised to investigate. He said he would speak with Mrs. Henderson and observe her class. Diana thanked him but made it clear she expected action, not just empty promises. She had spent too many years watching good people stay silent in the face of injustice. She wouldn't let that happen to her son. As Diana left the principal's office, she felt a mixture of emotions. She was angry that this was happening to Marcus. She was sad that her son had to experience this kind of treatment. But she was also determined. She would fight for him with every ounce of strength she had. No one would make her son feel like he didn't belong or wasn't good enough. Not on her watch. The news of Diana Williams's visit to the principal's office spread through the school like wildfire. By lunchtime, Marcus heard whispers in the hallways. Some students looked at him with sympathy. Others avoided his eyes completely. Marcus felt exposed and vulnerable, like everyone was watching him. In chemistry class that afternoon, the atmosphere was tense. Mrs. Henderson walked in with a tight smile on her face. Her movements were stiff, and she avoided looking directly at Marcus. She began her lecture about organic compounds, speaking in her usual authoritative tone. But there was something different about her energy today. Principal Roberts had indeed spoken to her that morning. The conversation had not gone well for Mrs. Henderson. He had questioned her about Marcus's grades and her classroom behavior. She had defended herself, insisting that she treated all students equally and that Marcus simply wasn't performing at the level required for advanced chemistry. But when Principal Roberts showed her Marcus's test and pointed out the incorrectly marked answers, Mrs. Henderson had faltered. She claimed they were grading errors, simple mistakes that any teacher might make. The principal had looked at her with disappointment and told her that he would be observing her class personally and reviewing her grading practices for all students. Now, standing in front of her classroom, Mrs. Henderson felt cornered. She had built her reputation on being tough but fair. She prided herself on maintaining high standards. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had been harder on Marcus than on her other students. She had dismissed his questions and doubted his abilities in ways she never did with students who looked like her. During the class, Marcus raised his hand to answer a question. Mrs. Henderson paused, and for a moment it seemed like she might ignore him again. But then she remembered Principal Roberts' warning. She called on Marcus with forced politeness. Marcus answered correctly, explaining the concept of electron configurations clearly and thoroughly. Mrs. Henderson nodded stiffly and moved on to the next topic. Several students exchanged glances. They had noticed how she usually treated Marcus, and this sudden change was obvious to everyone. After class, a few of Marcus's classmates came up to him. Sarah, a girl who sat in the front row, apologized for not speaking up sooner. She said she had noticed how Mrs. Henderson treated him differently, but she had been afraid to say anything. Another student, David, told Marcus that his test answers had been correct and that everyone knew it. He said that Mrs. Henderson had a reputation for being difficult, but what she did to Marcus was wrong. Marcus felt a strange mixture of gratitude and anger. He was glad to know that others had noticed, but it hurt to realize they had all stayed silent while he suffered. That evening, Principal Roberts called Diana Williams. He thanked her for bringing this matter to his attention and informed her that he would be conducting a thorough review of Mrs. Henderson's teaching practices. He also mentioned that he would personally review Marcus's test and ensure that his grade was corrected. Diana appreciated the principal's response, but she knew this was just the beginning. She had seen situations like this before, where promises were made but nothing really changed. She told Principal Roberts that she would be monitoring the situation closely, and that she expected to see real improvements in how her son was treated. Over the next few days, Principal Roberts did exactly what he promised. He showed up unannounced to Mrs. Henderson's chemistry classes. He sat in the back of the room with a notepad, observing everything. Mrs. Henderson became increasingly nervous. Her teaching became more careful, more measured. She called on all students equally, including Marcus, but it wasn't just about calling on Marcus. Principal Roberts noticed other things too. He saw how Mrs. Henderson's face would tighten when Marcus spoke. He noticed the barely concealed irritation in her voice when she had to acknowledge that Marcus was right. He observed the subtle ways she tried to undermine Marcus's confidence, even while being outwardly polite. Principal Roberts also began reviewing Mrs. Henderson's grade books from the entire semester. What he found was troubling. Marcus wasn't the only student of color who seemed to receive harsher grading than his white classmates. There was a pattern, a consistent bias that couldn't be explained away as coincidence or honest mistakes. He pulled the tests of several students and compared them carefully. Students with similar answers received different grades. In many cases, students of color had correct answers marked wrong, while white students with the same or even less accurate answers received full credit. The evidence was undeniable. Principal Roberts scheduled another meeting with Mrs. Henderson. This time his tone was much more serious. He presented her with the evidence he had gathered, showing her the grading disparities and the pattern of bias. He told her that this was unacceptable and that immediate changes needed to be made. Mrs. Henderson's face went pale. She tried to defend herself again, insisting that these were honest mistakes, that she had never intended to discriminate against anyone. But Principal Roberts cut her off. He told her that intent didn't matter when the impact was so clearly harmful. He informed her that she would be required to undergo sensitivity training, and that her classes would continue to be monitored. Also told her that she needed to personally apologize to Marcus and correct his grades immediately. Mrs. Henderson felt humiliated, but she had no choice. Her job was on the line, and she knew it. She agreed to everything the principal demanded, though inside she was seething with resentment. The next day, Mrs. Henderson asked Marcus to stay after class. Marcus felt his heart racing. He didn't know what to expect. Part of him was afraid that she would punish him somehow for his mother's intervention. But when the other students left and he approached her desk, Mrs. Henderson's expression was different than usual. She looked uncomfortable and embarrassed. She told Marcus that she had reviewed his test and that there had been grading errors. She said his grade was being changed from a C to an A, which is what he had actually earned. She also said that she wanted to apologize for any misunderstandings that may have occurred. Marcus stood there not knowing what to say. The apology felt hollow, forced. He could tell that Mrs. Henderson didn't really mean it, that she was only saying these things because she had to, but he nodded politely and thanked her. He took the corrected test and left the classroom, feeling a strange emptiness. He wanted to feel victorious. His grade had been corrected and his teacher had apologized. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like something had been broken that couldn't be fully repaired. He had learned a hard lesson about how the world really worked, about how even in places that were supposed to be safe and fair, prejudice could exist. When Marcus got home that day, he showed his mother the corrected test. Diana smiled and hugged him tight. She told him how proud she was of him, not just for his intelligence, but for his courage in speaking up about what was wrong. She also told him that this experience, as painful as it was, would make him stronger. But Diana wasn't satisfied with just a corrected grade and a hollow apology. She knew that Mrs. Henderson needed to face real consequences for her actions. She also knew that there might be other students who were suffering in silence, students whose parents might not have the time or resources to fight for them the way she had fought for Marcus. Diana decided to attend the next school board meeting. She prepared a statement detailing everything that had happened to Marcus. She gathered evidence, including the original test with the incorrect grades and testimonies from other students who had witnessed Mrs. Henderson's biased behavior. Marcus begged his mother not to make this more public. He was already dealing with awkward stares and whispers at school. He was afraid that this would make him even more of a target. But Diana explained to him that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about making sure that no other student had to go through what he went through. She told him about her own experiences growing up, about the times when she had been treated unfairly because of the color of her skin. She told him about the people who had stood up for her, who had refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. She said that now it was her turn to be that person for others. Marcus understood, even though it was hard. He saw the determination in his mother's eyes, the same determination that had gotten her through nursing school while raising him alone. The same determination that made her work 2 jobs without complaint. The same determination that made her his hero. The night before the school board meeting, Diana practiced her statement over and over. She wanted to be clear, factual, and persuasive. She wanted to make sure that the board understood the seriousness of what had happened. She knew that Mrs. Henderson probably had supporters, people who would defend her and make excuses for her behavior. But Diana also knew the truth, and she believed that the truth, when spoken clearly and backed by evidence, had power. She went to bed that night feeling nervous but ready. Tomorrow would be another battle. But she had already proven that she was willing to fight for her son and for what was right. The school board meeting was held in the district's main conference room on a Thursday evening. Diana arrived early, dressed professionally in the same navy suit she had worn to meet with Principal Roberts. She carried a folder containing all her evidence, organized and ready to present. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve was solid as steel. The room gradually filled with board members, administrators, teachers, and concerned parents. Diana noticed Mrs. Henderson sitting near the back, her face carefully neutral. Their eyes met briefly, and Diana saw something flash across the teacher's face. Was it fear? Anger? Shame? Perhaps all 3. Principal Roberts was also present, sitting with other school administrators. He gave Diana a small nod of acknowledgement. Despite their rocky start, he had proven to be someone who took the issue seriously, once presented with evidence. Diana respected that, even as she wished he had noticed the problem on his own. The board meeting began with routine business. Budget discussions, facility updates, upcoming school events. Diana waited patiently for the public comment period, her heart pounding steadily in her chest. She thought about Marcus, who was at home with a neighbor, probably worrying about what would happen tonight. Finally, the board chairman announced that they would now hear from community members. Diana stood and walked to the microphone at the front of the room. She introduced herself clearly, stating her name and identifying herself as the mother of Marcus Williams, a student at Lincoln High School. She began her statement calmly and factually. She described Marcus's love of science, his dreams of becoming a doctor, his dedication to his studies. She talked about how he had noticed he was being treated differently in Mrs. Henderson's chemistry class, how he had been ignored when he raised his hand, how his questions went unanswered while other students received attention and encouragement. Then Diana presented the evidence. She held up the original test, pointing out the answers that had been marked wrong despite being correct. She showed the corrected version with the improved grade. She explained the pattern of bias that Principal Roberts had discovered when he reviewed the grading records. The room was completely silent. Every eye was fixed on Diana. She spoke with quiet power, her voice never rising but carrying to every corner of the room. She described the conversation where Mrs. Henderson had suggested that Marcus should drop chemistry and take easier classes, implying that he simply wasn't capable of advanced science. Diana paused, taking a breath before continuing. She spoke about the impact this experience had on her son, how he had come home defeated and questioning his own abilities, how a bright, confident boy had been made to feel small and inadequate by someone who was supposed to nurture his education. But Diana didn't just talk about Marcus. She had done her research. She had spoken quietly with other parents whose children were in Mrs. Henderson's classes. She had learned that Marcus wasn't alone in his experience. There were other students, other young people of color who had similar stories but whose parents hadn't known how to address the issue or had been afraid to speak up. Diana shared these stories, careful to protect the privacy of those who weren't ready to come forward publicly, but whose experiences added weight to the evidence. She talked about a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for too long, a systemic problem that extended beyond one student or one test. As Diana spoke, she noticed different reactions around the room. Some board members leaned forward, clearly concerned. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. A few parents in the audience nodded in agreement, while others whispered to each other with skeptical expressions. Mrs. Henderson's face had turned bright red. She stared at her hands, refusing to look up. Diana could see the tension in the teacher's shoulders, the way her jaw was clenched tight. For a moment, Diana almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she remembered her son's face, remembered his pain, and her sympathy evaporated. Diana concluded her statement with a direct request. She asked the school board to conduct a full investigation into Mrs. Henderson's grading practices and classroom behavior. She requested mandatory bias training not just for Mrs. Henderson, but for all teachers in the district. She also asked that there be clear protocols established for students and parents to report discriminatory treatment without fear of retaliation. When Diana finished and returned to her seat, there was a moment of heavy silence. Then the board chairman cleared his throat and thanked her for bringing this matter to their attention. He assured her that they took such concerns very seriously and would be discussing the appropriate response. But Diana knew that promises weren't enough. She had seen too many situations where people expressed concern but took no real action, so when the chairman asked if anyone else wished to comment, Diana was surprised to see several people stand up. The first was Sarah, the classmate who had apologized to Marcus. She was there with her parents, and she bravely walked to the microphone. In a shaking voice, Sarah confirmed everything Diana had said. She testified that she had witnessed Mrs. Henderson treating Marcus differently than other students. She described specific instances where Marcus's correct answers were questioned or dismissed, while identical answers from other students were praised. Sarah's parents stood behind her, their hands on her shoulders in support. When she finished speaking, her mother added that she was proud of her daughter for having the courage to speak truth, and that she hoped the board would show equal courage in addressing this situation. Next came Mr. Chen, the father of another student in Mrs. Henderson's class. His daughter was Asian American, and he shared that she had also experienced subtle bias in the classroom. While not as severe as what Marcus faced, there had been comments about her accent, assumptions about what subjects she should be good at, microaggressions that added up over time. One by one, several parents came forward. Not all of them had children in Mrs. Henderson's class, but they spoke about the importance of creating truly inclusive educational environments. They talked about the responsibility schools had to protect all students and to address bias wherever it appeared. The most powerful testimony came from Mrs. Johnson, an elderly black woman who had been a teacher in the district for 30 years before retiring. She spoke about the challenges she had faced in her career, the battles she had fought for her students. She looked directly at the board members and told them that this was their chance to show what they really stood for. Mrs. Johnson said that every day they delayed in taking meaningful action was another day that students were being harmed. She reminded them that these weren't just complaints or allegations. There was clear evidence of discriminatory grading practices. She asked them what message they wanted to send to students and families of color in their district. The board members looked distinctly uncomfortable now. This was no longer a simple matter of one parent with a complaint. This was a community demanding accountability and change. The chairman promised that they would move forward with a formal investigation immediately and would report back to the community within 30 days. After the meeting ended, several parents approached Diana to thank her for speaking up. Some shared their own experiences with discrimination in schools. Others offered their support for whatever came next. Diana felt overwhelmed by the solidarity but also energized by it. Mrs. Henderson left quickly through a side door, avoiding everyone. Diana caught a glimpse of her rushing to her car, her head down. For a brief moment, their eyes met again through the window. This time, what Diana saw in Mrs. Henderson's expression was unmistakable. It was the look of someone who had been exposed, someone whose carefully maintained facade had crumbled. Diana drove home that night feeling exhausted but accomplished. She had done what she needed to do. She had spoken her truth and presented her evidence. Now it was up to the school board to take appropriate action. But Diana knew she would be watching closely, ready to push further if necessary. When she got home, Marcus was waiting up for her. He hugged her tightly and asked how it went. Diana told him everything, including the other parents and students who had spoken up. Marcus was surprised and moved to learn that Sarah and others had come forward to support him. He asked his mother if she thought anything would really change. Diana looked at her son seriously and told him that she didn't know for certain, but that change never came without people being willing to fight for it. She told him that what happened tonight was just one step in a longer journey. Marcus nodded, understanding better than most 15-year-olds would. He had learned so much in the past few weeks, lessons that had nothing to do with chemistry formulas but everything to do with life. He had learned about injustice and courage, about silence and speaking up, about the importance of having people who would fight for you. Diana tucked her son into bed that night, something she hadn't done since he was small. She sat on the edge of his bed and told him how proud she was of him, not just for his intelligence or his grades, but for his character, for the young man he was becoming. She told him that this situation was hard, but that it would not define him or limit him. She promised him that she would continue to fight until things were made right, not just for him, but for every student who came after him. Marcus smiled at his mother, seeing her not just as his mom, but as his hero, his protector, his champion. As Diana turned off the light and left Marcus's room, she felt the weight of what lay ahead. The school board investigation would take time. There would likely be pushback from Mrs. Henderson and her supporters. This battle was far from over, but Diana Williams had never backed down from a fight, especially not when it came to her son. She thought about her own mother, who had marched for civil rights in the 1960s. She thought about her grandmother, who had worked as a maid, but had insisted that her children get an education. She came from a long line of strong women who had fought against injustice in their own ways. Now it was her turn to carry that torch forward, to fight that fight for the next generation. The school board investigation began immediately, just as promised. A special committee was formed, consisting of 3 board members, an independent education consultant, and a civil rights attorney. They were tasked with examining Mrs. Henderson's teaching practices, grading records, and classroom behavior over the past 3 years. For Marcus, life at school became strange and complicated. Some students treated him like a hero for standing up to Mrs. Henderson. Others avoided him, uncomfortable with the controversy. A few students, mostly friends of Mrs. Henderson or children of parents who defended her, gave him hostile looks in the hallways. Mrs. Henderson herself was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation results. A substitute teacher took over the chemistry class, a young woman named Ms. Rodriguez who was warm and encouraging to all students. The difference in classroom atmosphere was immediate and stark. Students who had been quiet and nervous in Mrs. Henderson's class now participated actively. Marcus found himself actually enjoying chemistry again. Ms. Rodriguez praised his understanding of complex concepts and encouraged him to consider entering science competitions. She told him he had real talent and shouldn't let anyone make him doubt his abilities. Her words helped heal some of the damage that Mrs. Henderson had caused. But not everyone was happy about the investigation. A group of parents organized in support of Mrs. Henderson. They wrote letters to the school board claiming that she was being unfairly targeted, that she was an excellent teacher with high standards, who was being punished for demanding excellence from her students. These parents argued that Diana Williams was overreacting, that she was playing the race card to excuse her son's poor performance. They conveniently ignored the evidence of incorrectly graded tests and the testimony from other students. They preferred their narrative where Mrs. Henderson was the victim of political correctness gone too far. The local newspaper caught wind of the story, and suddenly it became a community debate. Articles were written with headlines like, "Teacher Suspended After Bias Claims," and "Community Divided Over Discrimination Allegations at Lincoln High." Diana found herself being contacted by reporters, some sympathetic and others clearly skeptical. She gave a careful interview to a trusted journalist, laying out the facts clearly and presenting the evidence. She emphasized that this wasn't about attacking a teacher, but about ensuring fair treatment for all students. She spoke about the broader implications of bias in education and how it could crush the dreams and potential of young people. The article was published with Diana's photo and quotes. It presented both sides of the controversy, but included the undeniable evidence of the incorrectly graded tests. It also included statements from Sarah and Mr. Chen about their experiences. The article sparked intense discussion in the community and on social media. Marcus struggled with the public attention. He hadn't wanted any of this. He just wanted to study chemistry and work toward his dream of becoming a doctor. Now his personal experience was being debated by strangers online and in coffee shops around town. Some comments were supportive, but others were cruel and racist. Diana shielded Marcus from the worst of it, but she couldn't protect him completely. He saw some of the comments, read some of the hateful messages. It hurt deeply, but it also opened his eyes to realities about society that he had been partially protected from before. His father, who lived in another state and had limited involvement in Marcus's life, called after seeing the news. He expressed concern and offered support, which meant something to Marcus even though their relationship was complicated. His father told him to stay strong and not let ignorance defeat him. Meanwhile, the investigation continued methodically. The committee reviewed 3 years of Mrs. Henderson's gradebooks, comparing the scores of students with similar test answers. They interviewed current and former students, asking detailed questions about classroom experiences. They reviewed classroom observation reports from previous years. The pattern that emerged was clear and troubling. Mrs. Henderson consistently graded students of color more harshly than white students. The disparities couldn't be explained by actual performance differences. When students gave identical or similar answers, students of color received lower marks. The bias was subtle but consistent across hundreds of grading instances. The committee also uncovered troubling patterns in Mrs. Henderson's classroom interactions. Multiple students reported that she was more likely to call on white students, more patient with their questions, more encouraging of their abilities. Students of color reported feeling dismissed, ignored, or subjected to lower expectations. One former student, now in college, came forward with her own story. She was Latina and had been in Mrs. Henderson's class 4 years earlier. She described similar experiences to Marcus's, including being steered away from advanced science courses despite her strong performance. She said she had eventually given up on her dream of becoming an engineer because she began to believe she wasn't smart enough. This testimony was particularly powerful because it showed the long-term impact of Mrs. Henderson's bias. It wasn't just about grades or test scores. It was about crushing dreams and limiting potential. It was about making young people of color believe they didn't belong in science and advanced academics. The committee also examined Mrs. Henderson's background. They discovered that she had attended workshops on cultural competency and bias in education over the years, but apparently hadn't internalized or applied those lessons. Several colleagues mentioned that she often made comments about students needing to prove themselves or meet standards, language that seemed neutral but in practice was applied unevenly. One telling discovery came from her class roster patterns over the years. When given the choice of which students to recommend for honors or advanced placement classes, Mrs. Henderson consistently recommended white students over students of color with equal or better performance records. This pattern suggested that her bias extended beyond her own classroom and affected students' future opportunities. As the evidence mounted, even some of Mrs. Henderson's initial supporters began to waver. It was hard to argue with data and multiple consistent testimonies. The parents who had defended her so vigorously became quieter. A few even reached out to Diana privately to apologize for rushing to judgment. The school board scheduled a special meeting to review the investigation findings. Diana received a call from the board chairman asking if she and Marcus would be willing to attend. He explained that the board would be making important decisions and that they wanted to hear from the family before finalizing their response. Diana discussed it with Marcus. He was hesitant about facing more public attention, but he also felt that they had come too far to back down now. He wanted to see this through, to know that his painful experience might lead to positive change. They agreed to attend the meeting together. The night before the board meeting, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Mrs. Henderson, wondering if she understood the harm she had caused. He wondered if she would apologize sincerely this time, or if she would continue to deny that her actions were rooted in bias. He thought about all the other students who might be experiencing similar treatment in other classrooms. He thought about how many young people might be giving up on their dreams because teachers made them feel they weren't good enough. The weight of it all felt heavy on his 15-year-old shoulders. Diana noticed her son's restlessness. She came into his room and sat with him, just as she had done when he was a little boy with nightmares. She told him that what they were doing mattered, that speaking truth to power was never easy but was always important. She reminded him of the courage he had already shown just by coming forward. Marcus asked his mother if she ever got scared. Diana smiled and admitted that she was scared all the time. She was scared of failing her son, scared of not being able to protect him from the world's cruelties, scared of making the wrong decisions. But she said that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to do what was right even when you were afraid. Her words comforted Marcus. He realized that his mother wasn't some fearless superhero. She was a human being who got scared and worried just like he did, but she pushed through that fear because she loved him and believed in justice. That made her even more admirable in his eyes. The morning of the board meeting arrived. Diana and Marcus dressed carefully, wanting to look respectful and serious. As they drove to the school district office, they held hands, drawing strength from each other. Neither of them knew exactly what would happen today, but they knew they would face it together. When they arrived, they were surprised to see a crowd gathered outside the building. Some people held signs supporting Marcus and demanding accountability. Others held signs defending Mrs. Henderson and criticizing what they called unfair persecution. News cameras were there, filming the scene. Diana and Marcus walked through the crowd with their heads held high. Some people shouted encouragement. Others shouted criticism. Diana kept her hand on Marcus's shoulder, guiding him forward. They were here to see justice done, and nothing would turn them away from that purpose. Inside, the boardroom was packed. Diana spotted Principal Roberts, who gave them a supportive nod. She saw Sarah and her parents, Mr. Chen and his daughter, Mrs. Johnson, the retired teacher. She also saw Mrs. Henderson sitting with a lawyer, looking pale and tense. The board chairman called the meeting to order. He explained that they would be presenting the investigation findings and discussing the appropriate response. The room fell silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. This was when they would learn whether all the testimony, all the evidence, all the courage it took to come forward would actually matter. The board chairman began reading the investigation findings in a serious, measured tone. The room was so quiet that the sound of papers rustling seemed loud. He outlined the methodology the committee had used, the evidence they had examined, and the testimonies they had gathered. Every word carried weight. Then came the actual findings. The chairman stated clearly that the investigation had uncovered substantial evidence of discriminatory grading practices by Mrs. Patricia Henderson. He cited specific statistics showing the disparities in how students of color were graded compared to white students with equivalent work. The numbers were stark and undeniable. The chairman continued, describing the pattern of bias in classroom interactions. He mentioned the multiple student testimonies that corroborated Marcus's experience. He spoke about the long-term impact these practices had on students' academic confidence and future opportunities. Diana felt Marcus's hand tighten on hers. She glanced at him and saw tears forming in his eyes. These weren't tears of sadness, but of relief. Someone official was finally saying out loud that what happened to him was wrong, that he hadn't been imagining things, that his pain was valid and his experience was real. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone completely white. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she just stared straight ahead, seemingly in shock. She had perhaps believed until this very moment that she could explain everything away, that her reputation and years of service would protect her. The chairman then addressed the question of intent. He acknowledged that the committee could not definitively state whether Mrs. Henderson's bias was conscious or unconscious. He noted that she had denied any discriminatory intent and had expressed surprise at the findings. However, he emphasized that regardless of intent, the impact on students was harmful and unacceptable. He spoke about the concept of implicit bias, explaining that people could hold prejudiced attitudes and beliefs without being fully aware of them. He said this didn't excuse the behavior, but it did inform how the district should respond. The goal wasn't just to punish, but to ensure this never happened again. The board then announced their decisions. Mrs. Henderson would not be returning to the classroom at Lincoln High School. She would be given the option to resign with a neutral recommendation or face termination proceedings. If she chose to continue in education, she would be required to complete extensive bias training and would be subject to close monitoring. Additionally, the board announced sweeping changes to district policies. All teachers would be required to complete comprehensive training on cultural competency and implicit bias. A new system would be implemented for reviewing grading practices to identify potential patterns of bias. Students and parents would have clear, protected channels for reporting discriminatory treatment. The board also announced the creation of a district equity committee that would include parents, students, teachers, and community members. This committee would have real power to review policies and recommend changes. Diana would be invited to serve on this committee if she was willing. Finally, the board offered a formal apology to Marcus and the Williams family. The chairman looked directly at Marcus as he spoke, acknowledging the harm that had been done and the courage it took to come forward. He thanked Diana for her persistence and her commitment to not just her son but all students in the district. When the chairman finished, there was a moment of silence. Then the room erupted. Supporters applauded and cheered. Some people were crying. Others looked angry or upset. Mrs. Henderson stood abruptly and left the room with her lawyer, not speaking to anyone. Diana and Marcus were immediately surrounded by supporters. Sarah hugged Marcus, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Chen shook Diana's hand vigorously. Mrs. Johnson, the retired teacher, embraced Diana and whispered, "You did it. You really did it." Reporters tried to get statements from Diana, but she held up her hand and asked for a moment. She turned to Marcus and knelt down to be at eye level with him, even though he was almost as tall as she was now. She asked him how he was feeling. Marcus's emotions were complicated. He felt relieved that the truth had been acknowledged. He felt vindicated that his experience had been validated, but he also felt sad about everything that had happened. He felt angry that it took so much effort just to be treated fairly. And he felt worried about going back to school and facing everyone. Diana understood all of this without Marcus having to explain. She pulled him into a tight hug and told him that it was okay to feel all these things at once. She told him that this was a victory, but it was also a beginning. The real work of healing and change was just starting. Later, Diana did speak briefly to reporters. She thanked everyone who had supported her family and who had the courage to come forward with their own testimonies. She acknowledged that the situation had been difficult, but said she believed the board's response showed a genuine commitment to change. She emphasized that this wasn't about destroying one teacher's career, but about creating a system where all students could thrive regardless of their race or background. She expressed hope that other school districts would learn from what happened and would be proactive in addressing bias before students were harmed. When asked if she was satisfied with the outcome, Diana paused thoughtfully before answering. She said she was satisfied that the board had taken meaningful action, but that the true measure of success would be whether real change happened in classrooms. She said she would be watching and would continue to advocate for equity in education. In the days that followed, the story continued to generate discussion. Some praised the school board's decisive action and comprehensive response. Others criticized what they saw as an overreaction. But most people recognized that something important had happened, that a conversation about equity and bias in education had been opened in their community. Marcus returned to school to a mixed reception. Some students avoided him, uncomfortable with all the attention and controversy, but many more showed him support. Students he barely knew stopped him in the hallways to thank him for speaking up. Some shared their own experiences with discrimination, whispering their stories as if they had been waiting for permission to acknowledge what they had endured. Ms. Rodriguez, the substitute teacher who had taken over the chemistry class, was offered the position permanently. She accepted enthusiastically. Under her teaching, Marcus flourished. His grade improved even further, and he began to regain the confidence that Mrs. Henderson had damaged. Ms. Rodriguez encouraged Marcus to enter a regional science competition. With her support and guidance, he developed a project on chemical solutions for water purification. His presentation was confident and thorough. He won second place, which earned him a scholarship opportunity and recognition from his school. The day Marcus brought home his trophy and certificate, Diana cried tears of pride and relief. This was who her son really was when given the chance to shine. This was the potential that had been there all along, waiting to be nurtured rather than diminished. Mrs. Henderson did resign rather than face termination. She released a brief statement saying she had dedicated her life to education and was sorry if any of her students felt they had been treated unfairly. The apology still felt incomplete and impersonal, but Diana chose not to dwell on it. She had achieved what she set out to achieve. Diana did accept the invitation to join the District Equity Committee. She threw herself into the work with the same dedication she had shown in fighting for Marcus. She helped develop new policies and training programs. She reviewed complaints and ensured they were taken seriously. She became a voice not just for her own son but for all students who needed an advocate. Marcus continued to excel in his studies. The experience with Mrs. Henderson had changed him. There was no denying that. He was more aware now of how bias and discrimination worked, more conscious of the extra burdens that students of color often carried. But he refused to let that experience define or limit him. He joined the school's diversity club and became a peer mentor for younger students of color. He shared his story when appropriate, helping others understand that they weren't alone if they faced discrimination and that they had the right to speak up about it. As Marcus prepared for college applications in his junior year, he wrote his personal essay about this experience. He wrote about learning the difference between being smart and being believed to be smart. He wrote about his mother's courage and how it had inspired him to use his voice. He wrote about his commitment to becoming not just a doctor, but an advocate for health equity. Several prestigious universities offered him admission and scholarships. When acceptance letters started arriving, Diana couldn't stop smiling. Every envelope was proof that her son's dreams were still alive, that one teacher's bias hadn't been able to destroy his potential. On the day Marcus graduated from high school with honors, wearing multiple academic cords and medals, Diana sat in the audience with tears streaming down her face. She thought about how close they had come to a different outcome, how easily Marcus could have internalized Mrs. Henderson's low expectations and given up on himself. During his valedictorian speech, Marcus spoke about perseverance and advocacy. He talked about the importance of speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable. He thanked his mother, his voice